Heal off. It's a problem. A big problem. It's just... Fortnite matches ending by players just trying to pop heals to outlive the storm isn't exactly thrilling to watch.
But Qrei, he was able to pop a pizza. That's going to keep him in the game for even longer.
But unfortunately, over the last 6 years, heal off has gone from a niche trick that only a few players thought of to a core part of winning the highest level of competitive matches. This problem started all the way back in Chapter 1, when everyone was just a bit shit at the game. Originally, the final few storm circles didn't move. They instead just repeatedly kept closing in until there was no safe circle left. This meant that if a handful of players were still alive, they weren't forced to fight by the storm as they were all on their individual levels. However, the vast majority of pro scrims still ended in good old-fashioned fights, but there were some players pioneering the first heal-off meta to guarantee that they won the game. The final storm circle dealt 10 damage per second, and since the medkit took 10 seconds to activate and could only be used if the player had less than 100 HP, using one to heal off in the storm wasn't possible, as you would die to the storm before the medkit popped. A lot of players were just carrying bandages to try to survive a few additional seconds. However, by intentionally taking one tick to the storm and then starting the medkit 2 seconds before the zone fully closed, this meant that the medkit would activate just before the player died, granting them an additional 10 seconds in the storm and guaranteeing them the win. This could be extended even further by using cozy campfires, but the people hadn't really figured that one out yet. But in the Season 5 update, Epic Games would change the game forever by adding moving zones. Now remember, everyone is still pretty shit, so despite the material cap being 999 for every material, it was extremely rare for players to survive all the way to the final moving zones, which essentially removed heal off entirely. The general understanding was that heal off wasn't an issue, and that the addition of the new moving zones had fixed the problem. On the surface, this seemed to be the case, as during the first real Fortnite tournament in 2018, the Summer Skirmish, there was really minimal discussion surrounding the mechanic, despite some games still being won by heal off. But only 1 month later, pro players knew that heal off was still possible and were developing strategies to ensure the games came down to this. Literally, if you want to win, you have to play for heal off, hunt vending machines for slurps, campfires, medkits. Pretty insane. Turns out that adding moving zones really didn't fix the problem, just masked it for a short period. Slowly, more discussions started to pop up with suggestions on how to fix the issue. Most of their suggestions were not good, I'm not gonna lie, but you know, they were trying. However, one suggestion was to make the final moving zone move infinitely, which would have been a pretty good solution. But Epic Games were about to drop a patch that would make things much worse. You see, during the Summer Skirmish and in everyday regular pub matches, a lot of players were dying to the storm. Remember, everyone was a bit shit. So probably without thinking about it that much, Epic Games made the final moving zones a little bit longer, which would mean that more players would run out of materials faster, resulting in less heal-offs. But right here, ladies and gentlemen, Epic Games made an oopsie. They also changed the max damage the storm would deal from 10 damage per second to 8 damage per second to stop people dying in the storm as much. Remember how I said it takes 10 seconds for a medkit to pop? Well, you now survive for a full 13 seconds in the storm from max health, which if you're starting to do the maths on a medkit that it takes 10 seconds to pop, this meant that there was an insanely broken heal-off strategy in the game. Even better, this was just 1 week before the Fall Skirmish, a $10 million LAN event. Here, about half of the games in the finals went down to players healing off with multiple medkits, slurps, bandages, and campfires. Thankfully though, most of the players hadn't fully realized that you could just carry 12 medkits from the start of the moving zones and play them all back to back to gain easy placement points. Following this tournament, many pros would go on to attempt this strategy in scrims, with Qrei surviving for over 2 minutes and 15 seconds in the storm, still with 6 medkits left in his inventory. It took 2 months for this to patch out, where in patch 7.10, the storm damage was returned to 10 damage per second. With this change, some endgames still came down to heal-offs during the World Cup times. However, with the introduction of the 500 material cap in competitive and the longer moving zones, any heal-offs that did occur were just the old trusty single medkit heal-offs again, with a bunch of campfires splayed all around. But with the introduction of fishing and floppers in Chapter 2, alongside the new Chug Splash item, many people feared that heal-offs would return, but for the most part, these were just utilized to allow players to tank storm damage in the early moving zones to allow the user to make nice storm plays. For the most part, there really wasn't an incentive to winning a game, so it made much more sense for players to carry these items to help them get deeper into the game, not just to win. Using one or more inventory slots just to win a single match when they might not even make it to that point just didn't really make much sense. That was until Fortnite introduced the Reboot round. You see, for the entirety of 2021, Fortnite's main game mode was trios for competitive, and during Season 5, the first FNCS of the year, 32 teams qualified to the Grand Finals through the semi-finals. However, since a trios lobby can fit 33 teams on it, this meant that there was still some space for one single team left. That's where the Reboot round comes into play. The best 33 teams who had yet to qualify into the finals all were loaded into one single game, and only the winning trio makes it into Grand Finals. Everyone else cries on Twitter. This was some of the best Fortnite you have ever seen right here. The tension in these matches was insane. But of course, Epic Games decided over the year to add a ton of different Reboot rounds, and it kind of got crazy at one point as the Grand Royale at the end of the year had 32 different Reboot rounds, which kind of completely defeated the point of having one single match to qualify. But this focus on winning games to make it to the Grand Finals slowly changed the meta to force players to figure out how to win with heal-off. Throughout the year, players carried pretty much every white heal imaginable into endgame. Chug cannons, floppers, medkits, and even cabbages and sweet corn. Yes, you heard that right. Cabbages and sweet corn. The Chapter 2 map had multiple fields where cabbages and sweet corn could be found, and since these slowly increased your HP, players could pop a cabbage or two and their HP would slowly start increasing, which gave them enough time to pop a 10-second medkit. But all whilst this was going on, a new, incredibly controversial strategy was being developed and practiced. The Qrei strat. Named after the player who was most notoriously known for it, Qrei, the idea was simple. Don't die. Now I know this sounds crazy, a bit revolutionary some might say, but by not dying, they win the game. It all comes down to a simple maths equation at the end of the day. All they needed to do was figure out a way to survive over 5,300 storm damage, and they did that by fishing. All three teammates fished small fries and floppers at all times during the game. Once the storm started to close in, the first two zones could simply be negated by standing in the water at Slurpy Swamps, as this healed the same amount of damage that the storm dealt. Then, when the zone moved to a 2-tick, they used the campfires around to heal up, all while still fishing for more floppers and small fries. One player then drops a ton of fish inside of the drop spot, and two of the teammates die, so that only one player is left to use all of these heals for the rest of the game. It's then just down to a matter of using fish, campfires, and all of the slurp barrels in and around Slurpy Swamps to continually heal up that final player until no one else is left alive. Now there are many roadblocks to this strategy, the main one being zone RNG, as if the zone pooled onto them, their entire strat pretty much just doesn't work, and of course it did heavily rely on other teams not knowing they were there and doing this, and those teams not taking any of the barrels inside of the POI. Now this may seem like a meme, but Qrei and his trio were able to make it into an FNCS Weekly Finals in Chapter 2 Season 6 and placed 25th, which was better than 8 other teams. The thing is, Qrei wasn't the only one attempting this strategy. A player by the name Vontre was also coming up with different ways to survive in the storm and found one which led him to getting banned. Actually, I think he got banned a few times. Vontre had an incredibly complex route, and the addition of the new Medmist item was key to his success. Because he couldn't move whilst popping heals, Medmist was the only item that allowed him to rotate from one area of the map to another whilst healing. He'd placed multiple medkits, floppers, medmists, and chug splashes all in a looting path around the map, allowing him to heal and rotate from campfire to campfire. Once Storm Surge hit, he'd drop a shield keg to ensure he wasn't losing any health from the surge and to survive through every single threshold. This incredibly well thought out strategy managed to get Vontre and Jason to a weekly FNCS qualifier in Chapter 3 Season 2, where they managed to get a second place in game number 2. But all of a sudden, Vontre was banned. People started to lose their mind as they thought that Epic Games had banned him because he was doing the heal-off strat. However, what had actually happened was the season prior, he had been using an exploit with a guzzle juice, which allowed him to stay alive in the storm infinitely. And somehow, Epic Games had only just found out about it now, or just actioned it now because they were brought to his attention. Now, this strategy was making a bit of a fool of the game. It was incredibly smart and well thought out, but let's be real, it was pretty lame and gimmicky. Epic Games attempted multiple ways of nerfing this strategy, such as nerfing the chance of fishing a small fry, changing the campfire relight cost to make it almost impossible to keep rekindling campfires, and the removal of infinite heals such as bandage bazooka and the chug cannon. But somehow these players were always able to find more methods to get around these regardless of the season. So Epic Games made a major mechanical change to combat this. Storm Sickness. Once a player takes 500 damage from the storm, they'll get a warning telling them that Storm Sickness will activate. Then, after taking 600 damage, the storm will start dealing increased damage that is pretty much impossible to survive through. This nerfed almost all heal-off strategies in the storm, and with Chapter 3 and onwards being duos, this meant there was one less person to fish on each team, essentially just removing the Qrei strat altogether. Or so they thought. In Chapter 3, Season 3, Fortnite added Reality Falls. Now around this POI were giant shield mushrooms, which when bounced on, granted slowly recharging health or shield. This led to players like Vontre and Qrei setting up complex paths using builds to bounce and fly from one mushroom to another. Now you may be asking, how did they get around storm sickness? Well, the answer to that lies in why they were banned. They found an exploit that by rebooting a player, they could lose all of the damage taken by Storm, effectively resetting the Storm Sickness counter. This meant that by repeatedly dying and rebooting each other in the Storm, they were able to survive until the very end of the match without activating Storm Sickness. Of course, this was an exploit, so they all received bans. The reboot bug was eventually patched as well, and since at this point there had been so many different versions of the heal-off strategy, people were a bit skeptical that the Qrei strat had been removed. Oh yeah, of course, while this is all happening, heal-offs are still occurring for regular players all of the time since the addition of the Medmist item, but as professional players do, they were finding ways to play around the storm sickness that were not exploits. That was pretty simple. Take 0 storm damage for the entire game. Now, if you've never played the highest level of stacked tournament game, this might seem like it's probably maybe not that hard, but this means that you have to be perfect on your positioning on every single rotation, every timing of those rotations, and most difficult of all, ensuring you never get stuck at the backside of the zone in an endgame and take even a single tick of that storm damage. But it would be Chapter 4 Season 2 where this really became a massive pain and frustration for everyone watching and playing, as almost every game would go down to heal off in the FNCS qualifiers. Epic were trying to make powerful healing items worth fighting for to promote mid-game fights, but this came in the shape of the buffed slurp juices that healed 120 HP and shield at the same time. They also added the pizza time reality augment, which each of the 8 slices healed 25 HP. Oh yeah, chug splashes and floppers were also rampant this season. Epic Games also decided to change the way the zones worked this season, and you know, they hadn't got it entirely right yet. So this meant that the final moving zones sometimes had over 30 people in it. So tons of players were alive because of the new zones. They all had insane amounts of healing, and most of them had attempted to take as little storm damage as possible. You can only imagine the thrilling endgames that we were able to watch.
Into the top 4 we go, with Qrei trying to heal off. He has multiple different variations.
Staying in this flow that has some floppers and chug splashes as well. If anybody else can keep on, look what we have here. Slurpfishes, chug splashes, and even more. Who's it gonna be? There's 3 players left only.
Naturally, players were unbelievably frustrated by this, and viewers incredibly bored. Epic attempted to fix this by changing the moving zones around in terms of the timings, and naturally people were still a bit skeptical that this would fix the massive heal-off issues. Eventually, just before Grand Finals, the pizza was vaulted and the chug splashes were made much less common, so the issue was partially fixed. But this meta was made significantly worse by the introduction of the Solo Victory Cup format. In order to win $100, all you needed to do was to qualify to the second round and then win a game. Remember what I said earlier about sometimes people not having enough incentive to win games? Well, now not only did the pros have a reason to practice not taking storm damage and taking all of those white heals and winning a game, the entire competitive player base was practicing how to win. At this point, with Victory Cups being in place for over a year and a half, the meta has developed massively, but the mechanical changes made to heals in Chapter 5 made it close to impossible to win a game without playing heal off. Medkits had been almost untouched since their release in early Chapter 1, but in Chapter 5 they were altered to have a 1-second activation time and a 9-second total heal time. They still take 10 seconds total to pop, but they now no longer heal you all at once. Instead, your HP gradually raises over time. Since a 10-tick storm kills you in 10 seconds, you should know by now it was impossible to use a medkit in the storm without using another form of heal at the same time. And now, since it gradually heals you, you can pop as many medkits as you like and stay alive. That is, until storm sickness kills you. This has meant that the solo cash cup meta has developed so far that people are only carrying a shotgun, 2 slots of medkits, some shields or even more white heals, and whatever the relevant mobility item is that season. Almost all solo cash cup finals games go down to storm sickness as players pop all 6 of their medkits, taking 600 storm damage while doing so, and then hope and pray that storm sickness wipes out the other players before them. Solo victory cups are at the point where you aren't playing to elim the other players, you're playing to hope the storm wipes them out before it wipes you out, which I think is pretty cringe.